everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello and welcome along to the 5 Yard Rush flagship show. Here following the divisional round. Last week was Super Wildcard and Super was missing. Well, it was back in full force this week for the divisional rounds. I'm your host as always, Dan. I'm joined as ever by Murf. Murf, how are you? How are you in the window here?
Yeah, feel a lot better today, Dan. That's for sure. I mean, obviously not with the results of yesterday, but it's been a tough week.
We don't need to talk NFL this week. It's fine.
I think we do, but catharsis, I think, if nothing else. But yeah, it's been a difficult week with COVID, but I feel better today. This is day 8, so I feel better today than I certainly have done through the weekend, and just blessed to be here. It's always great to do a show. It's always great to have a friend on who I really admire, whose work I really respect. So I'm looking forward to today's show. At times, I'm probably going to be a bit sad, but that's fine. Like I said, catharsis. I think, Daniel, you and I need it more than anyone. If nothing else, it's been a fantastic weekend, and for anybody who is unsure about the NFL, and obviously you're not because you're listening to this, but if you have friends who you've been trying to get into NFL for a while, and they always struggle with the stops, the starts, and the advert breaks and everything, just play them this weekend's games, and in particular the 2 from yesterday, and just I guarantee you it will convert fans. I guarantee it that some of your friends will pique interest, because sport does not get better as a drama, as a story, as a narrative than it did yesterday in 2 completely different but phenomenal games. And the 2 games on Saturday, any other weekend, we'd be talking about those games for days, maybe even weeks. They might just be an afterthought purely just on what happened on Sunday, but in their own right were terrific games. And as you said, it was a super weekend. Yeah. So
it was. We'll get into that. But as you may see, we're also joined here by BJ Rudell. BJ is the fantasy football director over at Pro Football Network. How are you, BJ? Are you well?
Dan, Murf, I'm doing all right.
Good.
Murf, sorry about your illness. And but what a great day to talk about football, just because it's been an up and down season for a lot of us fans who weren't sure even whether games would be canceled, what players' conditions would be with COVID, and the season is peaking at the perfect time, and just seeing the high caliber playing ability of some of these guys out there, and these just big players. I mean, I can't. It sounds redundant, but it's true. There's each of these teams that play this weekend have multiple big players who could take over games, and we saw some of them outshined by next year's bigger players, guys like Gabriel Davis. So it really had everything, and I agree with you entirely. If there's people out there who are on the fence about football, what happened this weekend really defines why we keep coming back for more.
It does. Absolutely. And how are things over at Pro Football Network? What have you been up to?
They're great, thank you. I started with them at the beginning of October, and so this is my first partial season with them. I've always done fantasy football as a hobby. It's been a full-on part-time hobby, but a hobby, and so it's been very interesting to work for an organization that's growing and has a clear mission and a pretty clear identity, and is expanding in terms of what it's trying to do, including in fantasy football. So it's really exciting to be a part of that.
Good. And we enjoy the work you guys are putting out for us. So we'll touch on the games there. Should we go through them a little bit in order? Murph, why don't you start us off? Bengals, Titans. I mean, BJ just mentioned players and big game players turning up and carrying teams on their back. And this is probably a case of one not on one of the sides, right? Derrick Henry was back.
Well, I mean, Derrick Henry had a decent game. He had a better game than perhaps I thought he might. He got in the end zone. He really, for a guy who's been out for 10 plus weeks, to see him, I think, if your expectation was Derrick Henry was going to come in, run for 150 yards and bulldoze the Bengals, then I think two things. One, you're probably disrespecting this Bengals defense, who have been very good against the run, top 5 against the run this year. And two, you're probably just forgetting the fact that he's been out for 10 weeks with a foot injury, regardless of whether or not he's not going to be 100%. It does take time. And especially with the running back position, it's one of those positions that it is repetition. It's doing it every single day. And it's why practice is so important for that position. It's just finding the holes. It's reading the coverages. It's such an important position to do through repetition over and over again. You can see linebackers miss games, come out, have a massive game, because as long as they can find a guy in an open field and they remember how to tackle, they can still have a pretty productive game. I'm not saying their practices aren't important. I'm not saying that, but it's very rare that you'll get a running back just from cold go and have an absolutely massive game. And he probably hasn't practiced all that much because he was only activated a few days before. So I still think what he did, and just the scenario and circumstances, was nothing short of remarkable, something that only Derrick Henry and very few players can do. But, you have to give credit to, the Bengals, because despite the fact that offensive line really did leak a lot, and, that has been that Achilles heel for a while now, and a lot of questions were asked why they didn't draft Penny Sewell over Jamar Chase. I mean, I think that argument's been put to bed this season, but what the Bengals did was just keep with it. They made plays. Mike Hilton, big free agency signing, made plays. And he made two. I mean, he made two plays in a row. He gets the tackle to take down Foreman, and then he gets the interception through a great read. And that changed the game for me. I think at that point, Titans score, it's game over. I think the Titans go on and they advance. And Mike Hilton changed the nature of that game. And the other thing here is, Evan Mcpherson, in that game against Green Bay, people were talking about him being cut. He's a phenomenal kicker. And it's proof that sometimes that position doesn't get a lot of respect. And, we joke about in fantasy football, the score he's broken the hands down. I understand people who don't want to play with kickers in leagues. I get it 100%. I do. And I don't even massively anti it. But having said that, it's an important position in football. And we saw that this weekend. All these games were defined by kicks. And Evan Mcpherson kicks a game winner from 52. And, he was drafted. It's why you draft a kicker sometimes. People say 5th round, too much for a kicker. You tell that the Bengals organization now, they're taking that pick all the way to the bank. How many 5th round picks are going to have the impact that Evan Mcpherson has had down the stretch and also in Saturday's game?
That's it. They certainly drove it on. It was touch and go all the way to the line. But I think Bengals are becoming a lot of people's second favourite team through this little playoff run at the minute. I think that the youth and the exuberance that they go in at games at the minute is encouraging for a lot of people. So, BJ, I'm going to throw it to you. The Niners and the Packers, and quite possibly Aaron Rodgers' last game at Lambeau and everywhere in a Green Bay jersey.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Bengals real quick too. If that's
is it okay?
Yeah, go for it. Some things to keep in mind. Joe Mixon, I'm fascinated by him. He had back-to-back, I think it was 30-plus touch games in the middle of the season. And since then, he hasn't cleared 3.9 yards a carry in any game. He's averaged about 3.4 since then. I'm really interested to see what he can do next week in Kansas City. He's definitely involved in the passing game. He's still a great running back, but statistically, objectively, he has slowed down. I find that fascinating. I'm also really interested from a dynasty perspective, what Dante Foreman can do to this backfield next year. Derrick Henry is on pace for about 465 touches when he went down, which would have blown the record out of the water for all-time touches in a season by about 50. I don't think Tennessee rides Derrick Henry 26, 28 touches a game next year, 30 touches a game. I think Foreman has carved out a strong complementary role, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how those two play off each other next season on what could be a pretty run-friendly offense. As far as the Packers and the Niners, I can speak to this on a fantasy perspective. I think a lot of people have talked about the special team woes of Green Bay and the pluckiness of this Niners team to basically, as I see it, rise above a mediocre quarterback to ascend. I think that we would be speaking very differently about the Niners. I don't want to speak crassly about this, but if the Niners had a top 8 quarterback, they would probably be the favorites for the Super Bowl. They don't. And so Jimmy Garoppolo can have the worst quarterback day of the weekend and still pull out an upset. I think he's one of only about 3 quarterbacks. I think it was one of 3 teams in the last 20 years or something like that in the postseason to win despite not scoring a touchdown. And we're seeing a lot of that from Garoppolo. He's had some good games, but he's going to have a tough time on the road, even against a team that the Niners have beaten 6 straight times in the Rams. I think Garoppolo remains the weak spot. If they can use Elijah Mitchell as in helping to move the chains, and Deebo Samuel and quick outs to George Kittle, I think that helps protect Garoppolo. But if Garoppolo is playing catch up, we have seen time and again that is not his forte. He couldn't do what Matthew Stafford did against him, what Brady did against the Rams. He couldn't have done even what Tennessee did to catch up to Cincinnati. It's not, that offense is not built that way. They've only lost 1 game this year by a lot. And at the end of that game, they were just dumping off to Elijah Mitchell. So I've spoken a lot about that part, but I just want to get that out there. And as far as the Packers, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, just a fascinating backfield. I understand why they re-signed Jones. I definitely understand why they drafted Dillon. And I do believe that it's too much that they have in that backfield right now. I think the team would have been better off if they had upgraded somewhere else, or if they had not signed Jones and used that money on another player. I have believed all season that, and I've written about this extensively to much consternation from many people who drafted Jones in the first round, that Dillon is just as talented as Jones. Their metrics are very similar in terms of yards after first contact and things of that nature. Next year, I'm really interested to see, is this a 50-50 timeshare? And are people going to overdraft Jones thinking they're getting a top 16 running back?
Yeah, and I think you're right, BJ, there. And I think the reason why people keep dipping back to Jones is because in previous years, even when he had Williams there, he only was getting 55% of the share, but he was making that count at a ridiculously efficient rate that it didn't matter. He could get 55% of the ball and still be an RB1 most weeks because he was hyper efficient in the red zone. He was hyper efficient in the passing game, and he can make things happen. Even yesterday, or Saturday night, he was still hyper efficient as a player for a fantasy perspective. Doesn't get much done on the ground. All of a sudden, he's got 9 touches. He gets a screen pass. He breaks one off. That's where, people are always going to dip back to Aaron Jones. But I do agree with you that actually, at what point, it's just not sustainable. At some point, you're either going to go to the younger player anyway because of tread on the tires and everything else, because talent-wise, there isn't much of a dip, if any at all, as you say. But 2, and one of the things, and Jack's got a question here I'm going to get to in a second, is Nathaniel Hackett's probably going to go. He's not going to be there next season. We think he's probably going to go to Denver. He's having a second interview today. I'm not convinced he's the answer to Denver's problems. If I'm being honest, I think he's had a more than decent career. He took, his offensive coordinator of the Jags when they went to the AFC title game. He made Blake Bortles look competent, which, you have to give him some kudos for that. But then on top of that, he has put together a team that's got 3 13-win seasons in a row and called the plays on them. Having said that, there's nothing in his play calling that gives me any sort of confidence that if he doesn't have Aaron Rodgers behind him, that he's going to dial up a load of great plays. And that's where I think Denver are going to have a problem. Now, if Rodgers ends up in Denver, it's going to be a great hire. But That's going to be the thing. But to Jack's point about any issues with Matt LaFleur, great season coach, can't get it done in the playoffs. I think when I look at yesterday's game, I find it hard to fault Matt LaFleur. And normally I would. Normally I'd sit here and I'm similar to Jack. I think he's overpraised for his in-season record. 13 win season, 3 wins in a row. I mean, it's great. It's phenomenal. You're in that time. You're 1-3 in the playoffs, 2-3 in the playoffs, 2-3 in the playoffs. And the same thing comes back to the Packers every single year. They can't stop the run. They cannot get enough points to get ahead and manage a lead. And they cannot seem to get it done in a tight spot in the fourth quarter. But having said that, that game was in hand. The game was in hand yesterday or Saturday night. Even at 10-3, yes, they should be ahead by more. And I think, to be honest, I think players like Rodgers and I think the offense should take a lot of the fault as well as the special teams. But as a coaching unit in terms of managing the game, I think Matt LaFleur did the right things. He loses on basically a freak play. The offense not clicking was because the players didn't make plays. The calls were right. He had guys open. Rodgers missed open guys. You can argue maybe he was slightly too conservative, maybe, but the Niners have done nothing all game. I don't mind that. If you've got a plan, it's working, you stick to it. I find it hard to make Matt LaFleur culpable for Saturday's defeat. Yes, he probably could have been a bit more adventurous, but as a whole, I do think that he needs to be more adventurous. And I think a new OC will help. I actually think them losing Hackett will force them into some changes. And I think they're going to have changes anyway. They got the second most amount of cap. Currently, they're 45 million over the cap. They're going to have to lose some players. I personally think Rodgers is done. He sounds like a man who's done. I actually think that's no great loss to the organization. He's not winning you rings. He's not getting you to Super Bowls. And that seems harsh because he's the MVP, right? Or he's going to be the MVP, but he's not getting you there. So actually you need to do something different. And I think a reinvestment of this team will be massive.
Do you think that was a distraction for the team? I know they're all professionals, but there was a lot of drama going on with Rodgers for the last 11 months, even going back to their loss last year in the playoffs to Brady and the Bucs. Do you think that in that locker room there is a lack of cohesion, that there is a sense that this is our window and damn it, there's like all the pressure is on to win and this is our last chance, but not in a good way, more in a disruptive way?
I'd be honest. I don't think it's that. If I'm going to be really honest, and this is supporting a team like the Buccaneers who have been so bereft of leadership for so long until Brady turned up, it's a leadership problem. Who's the leader of the Green Bay Packers? And people will say Rodgers. Is Rodgers really a leader? He's not a leader to me. Any guy who puts his organization, as you say, he's been a distraction, but he puts his organization out there in the firing line time and time and time again. He doesn't take hits for his teammates. He's not self-critical. He doesn't take the team on his back and say, guys, that was my fault today. I messed up. No, the first thing he did in that press conference is he threw special teams right under the bus.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And I think as well, there's no one standing up to Rodgers. So I think that's one problem. But the other problem is, who's the guy in the locker room who's going to go to Aaron Rodgers and say, you just need to shut the heck up?
Yeah.
Or in the organization or somewhere. Someone has to turn around and say to Rodgers, you just need to not get in a camera. You just need to shut up. And you need to let your football do the talking. And no one is. That's a leadership
You can do that with any other position. I think it's tough with quarterback, especially a 38-year-old quarterback who's, one of the most decorated of his generation. You start to be above reproach. And when a player is above reproach, they better act like it. Otherwise, it can be extremely disruptive if there's a perception on a team that you're playing by two different rules. I actually had a conversation with a fantasy analyst not long ago about Week 18. And I was arguing that, Packers should just rest their guys. Why risk an injury? And the analyst said, well, if Rodgers is out there, everyone's going to join their leader. And I said, how do we think that Dillon and Jones and Adams and others are excited to go out there and play in week 18 for nothing for Rodgers, knowing that, he's at that point, he might have even said if they reach the Super Bowl, he might not play or whatever. It was there was a sense of, are they really going to follow this guy? And I think the fact that I'm asking that question, not to say I know anything, but it raises the question, was there enough of a dissent in that locker room, especially, and I'll bring this up too, getting Randall Cobb and not using him in the biggest game of the season. That was Rodgers' guy. He insisted on getting Randall Cobb on that team. And I think he targeted him once. The teams understand what's going on the inside. They know if someone, Brady gets Gronk gets used. Brady gets Antonio Brown gets used. If you're Rodgers and you insist on getting a guy and then he's not one of your primary targets, why are you spending that money? Why are you distracting from the development of other players like Lazard and MVS, who you need to get those reps and get that experience and be in the fire? I think it creates just what that point is, that Rodgers, no one can stand up to him, like you're saying, Murph. And we see someone who was playing for his own ring, not for the Packers. It looked like from the outside that he was playing for his ring. And I think that showed up on the field.
But and I go back to this point that Dan and I made a few weeks ago, that everyone was ready to anoint the Packers as winners of the Super Bowl before the playoffs started. I watched a graphic on Sky Sports, and every pundit but Sean Gale picked the Packers to win the Super Bowl. And Dan and I talked about this before the playoffs. I said, they're not making the Super Bowl. Who's picking them to win the Super Bowl? Like, seriously, granted, Dan actually picked the 49ers to win. I did pick the Packers. I thought the Packers would just have enough. But I thought the Packers would lose next week. I didn't think they were going to make the Super Bowl. And I don't expect Aaron Rodgers to pull out a W in a tight spot. I just don't. He's never done it. The guy has, in the fourth quarter of games, when trailing to a team with a winning record, he's pulled out a W once in his entire career. One fourth quarter comeback when trailing against a team with a winning record in his entire career.
That's insane.
Yeah. This guy's going to go down as one of the best of all time. He's going to go down as a Hall of Famer. Has he done it in a tight spot?
I think Ryan Fitzpatrick has a bunch more.
Blake Bortles has more. Blake Bortles has more. Like, I could name a ton of quarterbacks that have more than that. Like, I'm not digging Rodgers out. I'm not digging Rodgers out. Rodgers is Rodgers. He is what he is. Do I think he's a monumental loss to the Green Bay Packers? I don't think he is. I think they needed to get rid. I think when they drafted Jordan Love at the time, I thought it was crazy. Now I think it's a good idea. I think you put him out there. You got cap problems. You trade him or you let him retire, whichever way works for you. You decide what you're going to do with your players and you build a nucleus around your new quarterback. And I think the time is now. And back to this Matt LaFleur discussion, Matt LaFleur has allowed this all to happen. They have pandered to Aaron Rodgers the last 3 years. They've pandered to him. They gave him the power. We saw this with Antonio Brown and the Buccaneers. Yes, the way it transpired on television is completely irresponsible and wrong. But do you think Bruce Arians would have put up with Aaron Rodgers and the way he's behaved the last 3 years? Not a hope. He'd have cut him. He'd have cut him like he'd cut anyone else. He doesn't care. And there's many coaches. Belichick wouldn't put up with it. The difference between great winning coaches is they understand that culture and leadership is at the center of every great football team. Packers don't have that. They have talented players. They have some of the best players in the NFL across both sides of the ball. But they're never going to win a championship until they instill a culture that is involved around leadership and is involved around this strong, unified bond. And they're not going to have that until Rodgers leaves. And Rodgers will be happy wherever he goes next. And you've only got to put up with him for 2 to 3 years. If Denver sign him, it's a great signing for Denver because he'll be happy for 2 or 3 years. And that's all you need him for. It's the same with Brady. Brady is now house money with the Buccaneers. He's won a ring. No one's annoyed that Brady went out yesterday. He didn't have a great first half, but no one's going to sit here. No fan at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is going to sit here and call Brady out because he's already delivered. It's house money. And I think Rodgers might go on a run and do something somewhere else because he'll be a different guy. But I think the time and everything is run down with when you're discontent in your job, you got to go. That's the bottom line. But yeah, I think the Packers will be an interesting one next year because I think they're going to need to do a massive rebuild. And as for where any of those guys end up in fantasy, it's way too early because they're one of sort of 2 or 3 teams they're going to have to go through a complete rebuild and reload to see what happens.
They are.
But,
and that's all about, we mentioned Devontae Adams and his position, and if he stays or goes, or a new quarterback for Devontae Adams in fantasy, or does he change teams? There's so many different variables there for all of those guys. It's
well, I think going back to BJ's point, AJ Dillon looks a heck of a dynasty buy right now. Not that you should be buying loads of running backs, but if you're going to buy one on the cheap, AJ Dillon might be one that might be worth a low second, high third round pick if you can part him from somebody for that.
Yeah,
there's not that many running backs in this class coming out that are going to be as good as what AJ Dillon can be if he's given a free role next year.
Yeah, if he's only getting 10 to 12 touches and he does what he does, obviously the offense will take a back seat a little bit if Rodgers leaves. But you have to figure that, like you're saying, from a dynasty perspective, the odds are that by 2023, 2024, he's the bell cow.
100%.
Well, I said if they go with Jordan Love, you'd expect him to lean on the run game a little bit early on next year as well. So, and it's Aaron Jones's last year under contract there as well. So,
yeah,
it all could open up quite nicely for him in the next sort of 2-year window. So,
yeah, I agree, and I think he gets a lot more usage next year.
Yeah, that takes us to Sunday then, Murf.
Really I'm exhausted. Wow! After we're only up to Sunday afternoon.
We saw Saturday, right? And it couldn't get any better than them 2 games. And then Sunday came round. We had an 8-hour wait from waking up to the evening to sit and watch the games, and
right.
That go, Murf. Really quickly. Don't dwell on it. Just get it out.
No, I mean it was a phenomenal entertainment spectacle. I mean, I don't know what happened with the Buccaneers in the first half, but they just didn't turn up. Defense or offense, the coverages were so soft. I mean, you talk about a plan to stop Cooper Kupp, and I don't know how many broken coverages there were, but there were so many. Yep. It felt bad for Josh Wells. Josh Wells was hurt. He was playing instead of Tristan Wirfs. They moved Aaron Donald along to completely manipulate that matchup. I think if you look at I question why the Buccaneers didn't make an adjustment there, take Wells off. Mm-hmm. I probably would have moved Kappa outside, and bring Stinney in. I think that would have given you a little bit more stability on the line. I think you could have dealt with the way that you manage Aaron Donald because they just had their way with them in the first half. There were some drops. There was some difficult. It was just a difficult spell and. The turning point of this game was right before the half. It looks like they're going to score. Cam Akers fumbles the ball right near the goal line. It's a heck of a play to loosen the ball. And, they stopped the score there. Yeah, because any score there and the game's over for me. And then they get the ball. They go 27-3. You think that's over. And I think Brady's going to get a lot of the plaudits for the comeback, even though it fell short. I still don't think Brady had a great game. I mean, he lands a 55-yard dime to Evans. That's probably one of the prettiest balls that you'll see. To do that at 44 is incredible, but he made some errors of judgment. It was tough because he had no receivers. Jalen Darden had concussion. Tyler Johnson was injured. They lined up Cameron Brate as a wide receiver. That's kind of how desperate the Buccaneers got yesterday. But they found a way, and I think this is where I would rather lose the way that the Buccaneers did than lose the way that, say, the Packers did. Because the Packers will sit there and say, well, our special teams sucked. We blew it on special teams. That's what a Packers fan will tell themselves. They'll think they were the best team all year, and they lost it on a freak play or 2 freak plays due to the special teams. And they're like, we'll just take that blame. It's kind of papering over the cracks. The Buccaneers team, that we were poor, we knew there were injuries. But even with everything, with all the players out, with everything, they fought until the final 35 seconds of this game. And as a fan, that's all I ever want. If the team are going to lose, at least go out with a bit of bottle that no one's questioning effort, leadership. quality. Every person who came out and spoke about the Buccaneers from the players' perspective yesterday and today talked about this locker room special. And you know what? They put it out there and showed it. Yes, they made mistakes. Yes, it was poor at times, but they showed a desire and willingness to win. And you can't buy that. You can't buy that. That's the difference for me. If the Buccaneers can keep Brady, by the way, the question's going to come up. He's going to stay, right? There's zero doubt in my mind, because and this isn't just a homer pick here. It just financially makes sense. He deferred $15 million of his signing bonus to next year. So if he leaves, he's got to repay the Buccaneers $16 million. He's not doing that. He's not doing that. It's not going to happen. He's not going to repay the Buccaneers $16 million. The Buccaneers might let him off it, maybe. But it goes against their cap. It goes against, it's already tight, 22 odd million they've got. Are they really going to just have that money against their cap next year? Probably not. I think they might let him defer it another year, free up the cap space, go one more, and then say, do you know what? We'll take the hit and then rebuild. Because I think this team thinks they can come back. That's why Bruce is coming back. I think
we always say good teams need that bit of pain and anguish as well. And you feel the Buccaneers can hold the core of this team together. They're coming back next year with that bit of pain and anguish.
100%. And they'll know that if injuries didn't get to them, they'd have had a good shot of winning this thing.
Yeah,
I think they win yesterday. I think they turn over the 49ers. I think regardless of what state, that's no disrespect. And then they play whoever's in the AFC title game. And I think then what happens? I think the Bucs have if Godwin doesn't go down, if Wirfs doesn't go down, this team had a heck of a shot. I mean, this defense, they won 13 games. That defense played for the first time together all season.
Since week one,
winning.
I think, yeah.
No, they hadn't played together all season. There'd always been someone out.
Yeah.
So I think, you can't moan about the luck, because last year the Buccaneers had it all. They had very few injuries and won the Super Bowl with minimal injuries. This year wasn't their year injury-wise. But the talent's still there. They'll draw people. I think Brady comes back. Gronk, I probably expect to come back. Listening to his comments today, he sounds like a man who seems quite motivated to come back. I think they'll lose some players, but I don't think they're that. You bring most of these players back, and I think they'll do it. There's no reason they're not going to be up there again next season. And I think it will be the final run of it for Brady. I think next year's his last year. I think he's done.
We always said he wants to play at 45, didn't he? So that is next year.
Well, and I just don't think he's giving the Buccaneers back $16 million, and I just don't think the Buccaneers will want him to. I don't think they're going to give it to him this year and have it go against their cap number, knowing that they do have guys under contract that are in a win now. At best, they'll reload, but they won't rebuild next year. They might rebuild the year after. So I think Brady comes back. They work it out. They might even give him like a little sweetheart deal where they void a load of years. They push the money out 3-4 years, and they give him a big payday. I don't know how they're going to do it, but Brady will be fine, and I think he'll be back. I think he'll be motivated to come back. I think he.
And more importantly, he's still capable, and we saw that yesterday. He didn't have his great,
and also, by the way,
still capable.
And we've done no justice to the Rams here. I thought the Rams were excellent, especially in the first half.
I was just about to ask BJ, because as me and you are both Bucs fans, BJ, give us an unbiased opinion on it.
Well, I thought that was still pretty good. I was pretty impressed with that. First of all, I'd love to see a stat that shows how many times a Tom Brady-led team has lost after coming back from, let's say, 2 touchdowns down. The idea that when Brady's coming back, there is a sense of impending doom. And the game against the Falcons in the Super Bowl was the pinnacle of that. That after that, you just couldn't count him out. And I think in this game, we saw Matthew Stafford in only his second postseason game ever, or second win.
Second win,
Brady, second win ever, yeah.
Second win. Brady in that offense forced Stafford and Kupp to do the near impossible, which is you've just blown a 24-point lead on the road against the defending Super Bowl champs, and you basically have 30 seconds left, because if you lose the coin toss, you're probably going to lose at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it. They do the near impossible. I think that's the big story for me, is that Matthew Stafford put it on the highest level, was able to go toe to toe with Brady and come out on top. And that is something that if the Rams end up winning the Super Bowl, Stafford's legacy is now secure, even more secure, having beaten Brady on the biggest stage on the road. I think that's just a freaking big deal.
100%.
I think Cam Akers is going to be a fascinating draft pick next year. I tweeted out when the game started that he'll be in my top 5. After he fumbled a couple times, I tweeted again and said maybe top 7. But Cam Akers is a special player. I'm fascinated to see what Darrell Henderson and Sonny Michel, if that core stays together, whether Cam Akers is the bell cow. He has sky high potential in that offense. And I'm really interested to see whether he's overdrafted or underdrafted next year. For the Bucs, one observation I have, and I have a more cynical view of this, which maybe isn't helpful for this conversation. But you look back on some of the best passing offenses in NFL history, and you look back on Peyton Manning's, 2013 Broncos. He had the late Demaryius Thomas. He had Julius Thomas, Eric Decker, Emmanuel Sanders. Arguably, with all respect to DT, arguably none of them Hall of Famers in terms of their although DT deserves it the most. He was the best. He was the number one receiver on one of the best passing attacks in NFL history.
Yeah.
And yet, person to person, the Bucs are better with their big 4. Evans, Godwin, Gronk, Antonio Brown, all future Hall of Famers, provided Godwin and Evans just play out their careers as expected.
That's bold. I don't think Brown gets there anymore.
That's a fair point. All with the production to match Hall of Fame production. But you're exactly right. So I'm dating myself because I've been saying this now for 2 off seasons, basically, is that this Bucs team was built to go undefeated. If everyone stayed healthy, this was an unstoppable team. And what Leonard Fournette did to run away with the running game, which this offseason, no one knew if Fournette or Ronald Jones was actually going to be the guy. There was some speculation that it would be Fournette, but it wasn't clear this offseason. No. And the fact that you had a dominant running game in Fournette and the Bucs still didn't make it to the NFC title game, despite losing 2 of their better receivers, 2 of their top 4. My cynical perspective on this is they still had a super team. They still had one of the game's top receivers. They still had the, I think, 3rd best tight end in terms of points per game. And they still had a top 5 running back. And they still had a good defense that, if not for some awful broken coverages, let Van Jefferson lose you the game. Don't let Cooper Kupp lose you the game. And I think Kupp has dominated Brady for 3 straight games. If you look at his numbers, he has about 500 receiving yards and about 5 touchdowns in 3 games, give or take. And the game before that he would have played against him was the Super Bowl. They lost 13-3, that ACL tear. And I think one of the subtexts for this story was a Cooper Kupp-led offense that should have been in Super Bowl 53. And we finally got to see on the biggest stage what Kupp can do to a Brady-led team. I know that they don't face off against each other, but I did see this as a Kupp versus Brady battle. I wrote about it as such, and I felt that Kupp was this was the game that we've been waiting 3 years from him since he tore his ACL, and it's going to be fascinating to see whether next year he is a frequent first round fantasy draft pick, and whether that will be a smart move. Given what he did, is he now officially the new Michael Thomas in terms of you can't go wrong with Cooper Kupp?
I couldn't do it. I don't think you can draft him in the first round. I just don't.
We'll get on to fantasy players a bit later, Murf. That's coming up. Hold your horses on that one. Bills Chiefs, though, rounded out an exceptional weekend. I was going to say really quickly, we'll get on to the players, but how do you talk about that Bills Chiefs game really quickly? It's not possible, is it? Although they did everything really quickly, including put up 18 points in about 1.5 million. So
I think you're looking at the new Manning and Brady yeah, I hate that comparison, but it is what it is, right? You're looking at the two quarterbacks, and with Burrow, I guess you'd add the Roethlisberger spice to what is going to be the AFC for the next 10 to 15 years. You've got three outstanding quarterbacks, in Mahomes and Allen. They're very similar in age. You're looking at players now, and I don't know how you stop Allen and Mahomes for the next 10 years. I don't know how you're going to do it. And then you add Herbert into the mix, and then you add Burrow into the mix. You add Lamar Jackson into the mix. All these guys are 26 or younger, and you're sitting there thinking, "Wow, I tell you what, the AFC for the next 10 years, if they all stay healthy and they all avoid serious injury, that's a conference. I tell you now, it's going to be an absolute war over the next 10 years. And I, for one, cannot wait to pay my money and watch it, because it's going to be phenomenal. And, the only way you can really talk about yesterday's game is that was the pinnacle of sport and pinnacle of NFL. You watch two quarterbacks who just didn't put a foot wrong. They didn't make a mistake. They left everything on the field. You can't be critical of the Bills for, people will say, oh, well, they gave up, the plays to Mahomes with, 13 seconds on the clock. They let him get the field goal. They did, but they tried to win the game because they just knew that if he got the field goal, it was going to be over. They rushed 4. They tried to get to the quarterback. It didn't happen. I don't mind them for doing it, because I think they knew. I think they knew if they lose the toss, they're not going to get a chance. And that is what happened. And I think they just tried to end the game. And you can't blame them for that. You can't, you want to sit there, and if that is the only fault, that's the only fault you can probably pick from the whole game. Because Allen for the last 2 weeks has been exceptional. Mahomes was terrific. And the only crime yesterday was the overtime rule in the NFL. This is now the end of the NFL overtime rule. It will not survive, because people were deprived of the true ending of this game. People, and that is how it would be viewed. A few years ago, it almost changed when Brady pickpocketed Mahomes of his first Super Bowl appearance. But I think enough people probably thought, nah, we'll probably leave it as it is. Having that game last night end the way it ended left everybody with a sour taste in their mouth, because I think everybody in the world wanted to put an arm around Josh Allen and say, here's a ball, go have a shot. And he might not make it, and then he might lose the game. But at least then Josh Allen can say, hey, I had my shot, I didn't pull it off. He lost to a coin flip. That's what he lost to. Josh Allen did nothing wrong yesterday. He was terrific. He's my favorite quarterback in the NFL to watch. I would watch him every single week and twice on Sundays. I'd have him on any team I'd ever coach or run or watch, whatever. I feel for him, because he did not deserve to lose. He certainly didn't deserve to lose in the fashion that he did.
I'll add to that and say that a couple months ago, I wrote on our Pro Football Network Facebook blog. It was after a tough loss. I think it was when Allen lost to the Jaguars. Just that inexplicable loss, his worst game of the season. And my question, kind of rhetorical question, was, is Josh Allen a franchise quarterback or a franchise elevating quarterback? And the difference is obvious, right? The franchise quarterback, there's a lot of franchise quarterbacks in the league. They'll play for 5+ years on that team. They're not going anywhere, and then we'll see what happens when their contract is up. Maybe they stick around another, 5-year contract. But the franchise elevating quarterback really does, they're not replacement value. You can't just go out and find another. And I think Josh Allen has demonstrated that he is one of the very few franchise elevating quarterbacks in the league. You can probably count them on one hand in terms of that level, where you put almost every other quarterback in that situation going into Kansas City against Mahomes, with Stefan Diggs apparently locked down pretty tightly, and still find a way. All credit to him. And I got to say also, I've had a soft spot for Jerick McKinnon since 2015 when he was backing up Adrian Peterson. 2 busted years of season-ending injuries in the preseason. Kind of drifting around the league, trying to find a home.
Yeah.
I think it's remarkable, and it's one of the reasons why I love sports. Is guys like Jerick McKinnon, who was the heir apparent to Adrian Peterson, and then got signed by San Francisco to be their number 1, and then he got hurt, and he never recovered. And now he's the de facto number 1. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is officially the number 1, but it's very clear that Jerick McKinnon brings a skill set and a burst that Edwards-Helaire does not currently have. And I think if the Chiefs go all the way, McKinnon is deserving of something for persevering through what I think a lot of NFL players might have wilted under similar circumstances. So that's my take.
No, I love that. I couldn't agree more. I thought he was terrific yesterday. And do you know what? He looked, above everything else, he looked really, really healthy. He just looked like the Jerick McKinnon of old. He ran with power, with confidence. And yeah, it was terrific to see. It was just, we'll never do that game justice last night. Just go back and watch it. Just go back and watch it. It really was just a fantastic watch. And I know some Bills fans. I know how gutted they are this morning. Do you know what? And I get it, right? I think it's easy for us as Bucs fans to take the loss because we got a ring last year. I'm not trying to rub that in, but that softens the blow. It softens the blow. Also, we won the division, which we've not done for 14 years. Those kind of things do soften the blow just a little bit. Josh Allen will win. He will win a Super Bowl with the Buffalo Bills. 100%. There's no way he cannot. There's no way he cannot. He is too good. He's too talented. He might be the Peyton Manning of this story. But you know what? Manning got 2 rings eventually. Might take him a bit of time. And they might be the Indianapolis Colts, and they might be the bridesmaid next year, maybe even the year after. But I tell you now, he will bring that Super Bowl ring to Buffalo, and he's not going to leave Buffalo until he does it. He's not. He's not going to leave. No way.
Yeah. So championship weekend's coming up. Bengals at Chiefs, Niners at Rams are 2 matchups. Let's just hope they can live up to what we had this weekend. Which way do you see them going, BJ?
It's too early for me to figure it out. I'm still recovering, and that's not a cop out. I've thought about it a lot, as I'm sure a lot of football fans have. I'm sure you all have, in the last 16 hours or so.
Yeah.
It is hard to bet against any of these teams. The easiest one to bet against on paper for me is the Niners, but I'd be stupid to bet against them. So it really comes down to that. On paper, I feel like, the Rams and the Chiefs just seem to have that extra cachet of veteran leadership. They've been there, and they're playing at home. And those are some intangibles. But we saw several home teams with veteran quarterbacks and veteran teams lose this past weekend. So I don't think that's enough. And the reality is that all 4 of these teams have players who can take over games.
Yeah.
Any of the Tyreek Hill can get 200-yard game. Jamar Chase can get a 200-yard game. Cooper Kupp can get a 200-yard game, and Deebo Samuel on the ground and through the air can get 200. I mean, this is an incredible situation that we're in right now. And all I can say is it's impossible to live up to the expectations of last weekend. But at the very least, we can take comfort that there's going to be a quarterback who's never won before, except for Patrick Mahomes, who has. So I'm sorry, three out of 4 have never won it. So I messed up there. But there's a high likelihood, not perfect, but a high likelihood that we're going to have a first-time quarterback as a Super Bowl champion. And if the Chiefs do win it, then man, after what we saw last year, and what we saw in the beginning of this season, starting 3-4, to me, this Super Bowl might mean more to the Chiefs, given the adversity they faced, than the first one when it looked like they could do no wrong. I think that's what makes this such a compelling story for the Chiefs this year, given how they started.
Yeah.
Fair. Murph, you going to jump off the fence? Are you going to pick a side?
Yeah, I'll jump off the fence. I've said the Chiefs all along in the AFC. To come through the game that they did against resurgent Bills, you can't not pick the Chiefs. The two main reasons I'm not gonna swivel despite what the Bengals did. First of all, that pass rush of the Chiefs is going to be just as brutal as the one that the Titans bring. Frank Clark is in the form of his life. He's going to eat Joe Burrow alive, I think, at times on Championship Sunday. But also just the coaching staff. I just think Zach Johnson, he's proved me wrong in a lot of ways. I've not been a big Zach Johnson fan. In fact, I've said he probably should have gone last season. He's surprised and developed in a lot of ways this season, but there are still those mistakes. We saw some on Saturday. We saw some in the wildcard round where just that clock management, the way that you handle close games, and some of the play calling is just a little bit, we saw it at times that Joe Burrow had to go to the line. He had to make out audibles, not just because of the coverage, but just because he felt that the play design in that situation was wrong. It's great that Burrow has that confidence and ability to do that because not many quarterbacks do in the NFL. But those are the little telltale signs that say, I just don't pick the coaching staff to beat Andy Reid and the Chiefs, who have been here, done it 4 straight time they've hosted the AFC title game. NFC side, I'm going to go again, coaching reasons. I'm going to go with the Niners. And I look at what Sunday taught me about the Rams, which is an incredibly competent team full of talent, full of incredible players who can just make play after play after play. And yet they were the twitchiest team I've ever seen with a 24-point lead. The mistakes after mistakes after mistakes. There's no way that any team should come back in the way that the Buccaneers did. And some of those were so self-inflicted. It's fine if a play's made and it's an incredible play, but they turned over the ball after turning the ball over themselves, where Stafford's not even looking and the ball goes over his shoulder. Like, stuff like that cannot happen at this level of football. That says that there is a bit of a confidence issue for me, that they're just, if they're getting into a tight game, and I think because the Niners have had their number so consistently, you got to remember that LA and Sean McVay right now are absolutely kicking themselves because they could have eliminated the Niners in Week 18. They could have eliminated them from the playoffs and did not. They could have hosted Sunday's game, but did not. They had a lot to play for in Week 18 and did not do it. And they're going to rue that because Kyle Shanahan, that is his mantra, is like, do you know what? These guys don't respect you because they didn't turn up in Week 18 thinking it didn't matter. Yeah. The story's going to write itself. I just think Kyle Shanahan is going to find a way to expose some of the weaknesses that are in McVay's coaching, and there isn't a lot. But I think his game management in the second half was abysmal. I think in any other situation, a cooler, calm, and collected coach would have found a way to just eat some more clock, to just manage the game, to just, do you know what? Don't deviate from what you're doing. You're hammering the opponents. Just put the ball in the air, put the game to bed. It got too conservative at times. It got a little bit... They just tripped over their own feet. And he just didn't take a step back and just go, okay, we just need to work out what we're going to do here. And I think Kyle Shanahan is going to exploit any weakness that's given to him. And I just think Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to make any mistakes. And if he doesn't make mistakes, I just think that they're going to get it done. So I'm going Niners. I'm going Niners Chiefs. Super Bowl.
We didn't particularly on the same one, I think, last week, but I'd go Niners Chiefs too. So we'll see if we can get these two right this week. So moving on, we'd be remiss without BJ here to do a way too early little look ahead to some players in fantasy perspective for 2022. So a few questions we've got to go through, and we'll touch on you guys and your early thoughts here. So first one, what players have really added to their value over the past month? I'm sure we've probably touched on a few during our run through of those games.
I got a couple to throw out there. One is Joe Burrow. Not long ago, he had, I think it was 6 touchdowns across 6 games. I mean, he was struggling. He'd hurt his finger during that stretch. And he came on strong at the end, and strong is an understatement. And he is now in this prime position of having 2 young receivers and a strong number 1 running back, bolstering his fantasy prowess. Not that he cares about his fantasy value, but managers do. So he has built his value. I felt like around week 13, week 14, there was some scuffling that had been going on. Just statistically, he was not putting up the kind of production that you want out of a QB1 by any stretch. And then he demonstrated that his ceiling is on par with everyone else's, and that's what people are waiting to see. The other one is Rashad Penny, who I did not buy into. I saw someone who is a more one-dimensional running back, not good in the passing game, more TD dependent than I cared for, in an offense that was struggling. And he far exceeded my expectations. He's finally in year 3, year 4, finally come through. And Chris Carson's status atop this depth chart is still a question mark after his neck injury, and questions about Carson's durability in general. Penny has done everything possible to ensure that he will be on fantasy maps, even if he's not named the starter next summer, or if he's not atop the depth chart. He is still someone that people have to take seriously.
Fair. Murph, anyone stick out for you?
Yeah, I got a couple of different names, but I do agree with everything that PJ has said there. For me, Devin Singletary. I think he's been absolutely exceptional. He proved that again yesterday. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that they're going to just pound him the rock next year. So if you got Zach Moss in Dynasty, I'm sorry. I still think there'll be some form of role, but I don't think it's going to be what you kind of hoped. I think Devin Singletary is a massive arrow up next season. He's one that I almost think could be overdrafted. I think he could go too much the other way. I think if you get him in that sort of 4th round range, I think he's a really interesting pick at that stage of the draft, maybe late 3rd.
Kind of where David Montgomery went this year. That sort of
range,
area.
I think is a really, really attractive place to take a level bet on someone like Singletary next year. Let's see how that flushes out. Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, what he did down the stretch is nothing short of phenomenal since week 13, wide receiver 2 in PPR formats. He had 3 wide receiver 6 weeks. He had a wide receiver 2 week in there as well. Just absolutely phenomenal what he did down the stretch. And I wrote a piece for Fantasy Pros this week. I broke down all the 2021 wide receiver rookies. I had a lot of praise for him. I think he's a really interesting player. Again, I'm slightly worried how high he's going to go in drafts. Maybe that recency bias is just going to tip a little bit too much, and Detroit is going to be a really fascinating team in this offseason. What are they going to do at quarterback? What are they going to do with the wide receiver core? What are they going to do from a talent perspective? But I really am intrigued to see what happens. But he's done his value the world of good. He'll be a very difficult player to get in Dynasty right now. Odell Beckham Jr. is another one. If he gets re-signed by the Rams, if they can afford to do it, be a really interesting addition, because he's kind of floated in this sort of 6th, 7th round wide receiver, always falling short. He is yards per target it's over 10. He's really becoming a playmaker in this offense. I want to buy any piece of this Rams offense next year. If he stays in LA, he'll be an interesting one for me. And last one, we saw it last night, was Gabe Davis. Not sure if they keep Emmanuel Sanders next year. And I tell you what, he looks a really exciting player. And I know that all the hype was there last season. He had this great end of run in 2020, and everyone bought him this year, and it didn't happen until late. But I just think this year is or 2022 could be a year. So I'm intrigued in Gabe Davis in 2022 for sure. So there's some of the players I'm definitely think have done their values a lot of good.
No point in me going there, because I've got Amon-Ra and Gabriel Davis as someone I was incredibly high on last year. And the fact that they did bring in Sanders just said that the Bills probably didn't trust him, and it started out that way early in the year, but he's sort of stepped up and delivered again. So hopefully this year they put a bit more trust in him and go from there. So next one then, we've got which 2021 rookies are you expecting a bigger breakout from going into 2022? What are your thoughts, guys?
I'll jump in. There's 4 guys. What's that?
Yeah, go for it. Go on. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's 4 guys I'll mention. Trevor Lawrence. I think he obviously has nowhere to go but up. The question is he a breakout candidate? I actually think he is. I think they have the second most cap space of all teams. He is an extraordinarily good quarterback, dual threat, who happened to have the card stacked against him a number of ways in his rookie campaign. I think that we saw what happened with Patrick Mahomes in year 2. We saw what happened with Lamar Jackson in year 2. Trevor Lawrence is again, not someone to take for granted as just a good quarterback. This is a guy who's supposed to be a franchise changing quarterback. And I think if he gets a little bit of support around him, namely one really good receiver, a Devontae Adams-like receiver, someone at the level of when DeAndre Hopkins went to Arizona to completely remake that passing attack. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Lawrence needs. He lost it with DJ Chark, who had 2 touchdowns in his first 3 games before going out for the season. Chark is not at a level that I'm talking about, but we could see what Lawrence could do, even as a rookie, if he had his guys healthy. I think an upgrade at receiver would go a long way. I'll throw out also
BJ,
Justin
just on that, let me just interject. Yeah. So looking at some of the players available on wide receiver, the names that stand out, Devontae Adams, that's going to be a tough one to do. Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson. Would you put either or both in that caliber of receiver that Jacksonville would be looking at potentially and elevating his game? Would you think Allen Robinson's not quite at the level you're thinking of?
Robinson is one of those. Anytime you get a guy like Robinson who has such an awful season from a statistical standpoint and pretty much injury plagued and phased out, it creates major questions over whether, I'll call it Dwayne Bowe syndrome. The idea of a former number 1 caliber receiver who just, because of injuries, because of whatever, just breaks down. Kelvin Benjamin, similar situation. Allen Robinson had a better track record than both those guys. But the fact is, it's hard to know if Robinson is at that level of being a difference maker at this stage in his career. But yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence needs a top 15 caliber receiver. He needs a guy there who is an anchor, who he can grow with for the next 3 years and develop his game with. And right now, if he's going to Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault and Dan Arnold, solid players, role players, but he's no better off than Jared Goff and probably worse off with that receiving core. He needs a playmaking talent that they can utilize to take some pressure off that offense. And so that's my thinking on it, but I don't have any clear answers. Justin Fields, for obvious reasons, I think, a year away from Nagy and being able to build that offense around him, he is an incredible dual threat talent. Elijah Moore, also obvious reasons. He is arguably the best receiver for the Jets. I would put Michael Carter in the same boat. If the Jets truly commit to Zach Wilson, Michael Carter, and Elijah Moore as their big 3 for the next few years, those 3 guys could be fantasy relevant every week. And finally, Kyle Pitts, who was a different player when Calvin Ridley stepped away from football. Ridley, I think Pitts was the TE3 or something like that when Ridley stepped away, and then Pitts struggled being the number 1 guy alongside Russell Gage. That entire passing attack changed. And as a rookie tight end put in that situation where defenses could clamp down more easily, it was an untenable situation. I think Pitts is a top 3 tight end this next year. I think he gets about 230 plus fantasy points, and I would draft him happily in the 5th or 6th round of, let's say, a 14-team league.
If he gets there. But yeah, I'm with you. But you're drafting him in the one area of a draft I absolutely hate taking tight ends. So I'm going to go with Amari St. Brown because I've already said him, so it makes complete sense. I think he's going to break out even more. I'm not sure if you guys are going to give me Jalen Waddle, but I think Jalen Waddle is going to go nuclear next year. I know he was the wide receiver 13, but I think we've only seen the flashes of what. I think top 5. I think he's top 5 next year. I just think with an actual offensive coordinator who can call plays, mixed in with the talent they've already got down there, plus some draft capital they've got this year to probably shore up a couple of those holes. I think they're a really, really interesting team to watch. It depends on who they hire. I will caveat it slightly. But I do think that Waddle to Tua relationship is special. I think there's a lot of positive regression in that touchdown column. He was not exploited in the red zone anywhere near as much because the Dolphins couldn't get near the red zone for want or money. And then when they did, they decided to get it to the 2-yard line and pound it in. I don't think they're going to do that this year. I think it's going to be a very different offense. And I think Jalen Waddle, if I'm going to put a bold take out there, he's going to outscore Jamar Chase next year. I genuinely believe that in fantasy football. I think he's going to outscore Jamar Chase if the environment is right. I'm talking about offensive coach, offensive coordinator comes in, or the offensive coach calls plays, who is going to really dial up and really utilize the weapons that they do have down there because they're quite stacked. They have some very, very good players on that team. But I think they just need to sort the coaching play calling out and need to just get the ball to Jalen Waddle a lot more than they did. I've got a really, really super sleeper here. And it's Amari Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers.
Okay.
I think Amari Rodgers is going to break out in 22 because I don't see Devontae Adams staying. I do not see Aaron Rodgers staying. I think they both go. They spent a 3rd-round draft pick on him last year. And, who is the person that he would have spent probably the most amount of time with this year? Jordan Love.
Yeah.
They've put loads of scout team together. Jordan Love is going to, I'm pretty sure he's going to be the quarterback next year. He's going to go to the receiver he has spent a lot of time with this year. They already have some form of chemistry. Amari Rodgers looks decent in the punt return game. He has some burst, he has some speed that didn't really show up in his metrics. I just think Amari Rodgers is primed in a situation where I don't think Randall Cobb's going to get it done. MVS has always been slightly too inconsistent. There is a job there to be won by someone. I'm not convinced it's Alan Lazard who's going to win the job. I can see Amari Rodgers in this stage of uncertainty almost do something very similar to what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done, and that is elevate himself in a pool of pretty average receivers to be fantasy relevant. So if I'm picking a real late dart throw next year, Amari Rodgers is the guy I'm going to take.
Fair. 2 names I've written down here is, again, both wide receivers. Josh Palmer. Out of Tennessee, I thought with the Chargers, I expected slightly more from him this year, but I think Mike Williams staying at the time maybe detracted a little bit from that big guy outside role. And Nico Collins at the Texans. He was lacking touchdowns this year. He got something late on, so I'm hoping he can kind of build off of that now and move forward. Certainly someone I've got stuck on a lot of taxi squads in my dynasty roster, so hopefully that comes to fruition. Next question to throw at you guys then is 2021 disappointments that you're looking to bounce back next year. Who are we after, BJ? Who's let you down this year that you're hanging on to in the hope they can repay it?
Just a few guys. Kenny Gallaudet, it's just hard to understand how the Giants could have underutilized such an expensive player so egregiously. Obviously, injuries played a role, but he's getting 1-2 targets a game down the stretch, and it just looked like it was a broken team at that point. I think that depending on the quarterback situation next year, depending on how the team is structured, it's hard to imagine, though, that Kenny Gallaudet will be just stuck in neutral. They didn't pay that much to have that happen. So I think it's just kind of he has to bounce back or else situation. Also, the Broncos receiving core, assuming they have a quarterback upgrade, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or whoever. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, 2 of the 3 getting big contract extensions. They didn't do that so that these guys could get 30 yards a game. This is a passing attack that is just missing a quarterback. And if you're investing in Sutton, Jeudy, and Patrick, particularly Sutton and Jeudy, I think Patrick unfortunately remains the third wheel, even though he has a great deal of talent and can step up. He's more of the Tyler Boyd for me in this offense. I think that Sutton and Jeudy are going to be underdrafted next year unless the Broncos sign a big-time quarterback, and then they'll probably be priced about right, but they should bounce back. And finally, Nahim Hines, one of my favorite bounce-back guys. This is a guy who earned 4 fewer touches a game, and yet he averaged more yards per carry, 4.9, than any time in his career. He was number 5 in broken tackles for all running backs with at least 20 carries all season. And he improved his yards after contact by half a yard this year over last year. On all key metrics, he was better than last year. The biggest difference was Jonathan Taylor dominated touches. And because I don't believe that's going to happen in 2022, I therefore believe that Nahim Hines will be a major bounce back guy. He was top 20 fantasy running back last year. This year he was number 45, something like that. He will come back into the top 30 range, probably top 25 range, if they use him the way he should be used.
I'm so with you on Nahim Hines. I love that. I'm right there with you, 100%. I'm going to rattle off just 3 names for me. Nick Chubb. I don't think Kareem Hunt is going to be back next year. I think they're going to really run the wheels off Nick Chubb next year. I really believe that they're going to use him more than they've ever used him before. That might push him into a bit of an injury risk, but I think he's going to get a volume that he deserves of his talent. And I think it's going to be make or break on the injury side to see whether or not he stands up. But from a bounce back, I think he's due one. David Montgomery is another one for me. I actually think he's probably one of the most disrespected talents in the NFL. Yes, okay, he was injured last year, but I think, again, Matt Nagy leaving Chicago is absolutely no loss to David Montgomery. That's going to inflate his value quite significantly. So I think he's a very attractive option next year in Chicago, and I think that Chicago offense is primed to do something reasonably good, depending on who they get a receiver to replace Allen Robinson. Last one is Chase Claypool. He's going to get a quarterback that can throw. I mean, he didn't have that this year. I think he needs to sort his game management out. I think he is a bit of a diva, and I think that's something he needs to get out of his game.
Yep.
But I think if he can do that, I think he's going to have a huge year in 2022. It's all set up for him to do it in Pittsburgh, obviously, depending. But if they get a quarterback with an arm, like Jameis Winston in free agency, Chase Claypool is going to be the guy who's going to benefit the most from that sort of talent. So either way, he's going to bounce back from where he finished. His range of outcomes will determine on the arm talent of the player they bring in. If they bring in someone like Teddy Bridgewater, it's not going to go up as much as if it's going to be someone like a Jameis Winston or someone with a bit more arm talent and success. I mean, imagine if they're not going to do it. Aaron Rodgers, Chase Claypool would probably be one of the most drafted wide receivers in football.
Fair. I agree with BJ. I had Cortland Sutton on my list. I've also got another giant on there. What's Saquon Barkley?
I'm not sure if I like that.
I know he's got to stay, but the whole Giants organization has been such a mess and not using things properly. So hopefully, and the other guy I've got is a quarterback in Russell Wilson. Now, whether he moves or stays, he may go under the radar if, as BJ said, Penny can cast out a role and Carson comes back. I just expect him to perform a little bit better than he did this year. So I'd hope for something back on that one. So moving on, BJ, who's going to be drafted too high for you next year? Who are you not paying for?
Dan, I think you mentioned Nico Collins short time ago, so I'm going to go Brandon Cooks as one of my 5 drafted too high. He accounted for something like 26% of all of Houston's targets in the passing game. This was just a case where he was the one reliable guy in that offense week in and week out. Yeah. And that's not a sustainable proposition given the cap space that team has. They are rebuilding. They're going to have a lot more surrounding talent. Cooks might be the, in the top 25 preseason next year. I still would fade him. I think he's going to be drafted too high. He's more of a filler kind of player on a roster in general. And I think that's how it's going to be next year. I think Austin Eckler is going to be drafted too high. There's been talk from the coaching staff about not pushing him as hard as they did this year. Justin Jackson was able to finally step up, the former 7th rounder. And really, I shouldn't say finally, but when given the opportunity, he demonstrated he could be a good backup on this team, something they've been looking for the past couple of years. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're going to give Eckler a little bit of a break from that 300 touch pace roughly that he was on. Cordarrelle Patterson is an easy draft too high. I think that what he did for a while, he and Jonathan Taylor were my picks for MVP because I think Atlanta, when they were in the playoff hunt, you take Patterson out of that equation, they would have been about a 2-10 team at that point instead of whatever they were, 5-7, 6-6 with a shot at the playoffs. So Patterson is just a once in a decade out of nowhere, biding his time and breaking through in the right situation. I don't think it can strike twice. James Conner is going to be drafted too high. I think there's going to be an expectation, kind of like there was a few years ago in his first full season as Pittsburgh's starting running back, that he is the guy. Conner was never built to be the guy. I think he benefited from a whole host of factors, including Edmonds' injury, including DeAndre Hopkins being out, Kyler Murray being out for a while. When this offense is fully loaded and you've got 7 guys to choose from, I don't think Conner is getting 18 whatever touchdowns again. And finally, controversial pick, but I'll be controversial if I think it's right. Jonathan Taylor. In the NFL history, 72% of the time, when a running back has had at least 350 touches in a season, they have regressed sharply, on average about 20-25%. The following year, whether due to injuries or simple regression. I warned against Derrick Henry this past summer. I warned against Christian McCaffrey the previous summer. Same reasons. There is a danger. There's a yellow flag when these guys are overworked. And even on a very minuscule level, Jonathan Taylor, after that huge 32-touch outing he had mid-season, his yards per carry dropped about 3/4 of a point from that point going forward. I don't think it was a coincidence. His final 2 games, I think he had only 1 target, no receptions. This is a guy who was not utilized. He was still dominant, but he's going to be the overall RB1 next year, no questions asked. Same thing with Christian McCaffrey 2 years ago. And I think the mistake is we look at statistics, we look at probabilities, 72%. I've pointed out that number for 2 straight summers. I'll be pointing it out again for this 3rd summer. That is the reason why I'm fading Jonathan Taylor as my number 1.
Fair. Murf, who have you got?
As I called up Hassam's on my list. By the way, BJ, I completely disagree with Brandon Cooks because Brandon Cooks has been the most underdrafted player in the last 4 years. I can't wait until he's a 7th round pick again this year so that I can write about he's the most undrafted player for the 5th year in a row. Because
it's the same article, right? You just keep publishing it.
It's exactly that. It's the easiest work I'll ever do.
Work,
I literally, all I have to do is just change the team and some statistics and it's just print and go. This is just... The guy puts up 1,000-yard seasons after 1,000-yard seasons after 1,000-yard seasons. He's always going to outperform his ADP as long as people like you continue to write him off. So please do, because it makes my life easier. Cordell Patterson, obviously, is just the easiest one going. I'm going to be controversial with BJ, and I'm going to go. I, by the way, agree with Jonathan Taylor. I think he's definitely a candidate. But Amari Cooper is another one for me. I'm just not sold on this Dallas offense being as potent as people keep saying it is. It does not score touchdowns at the rate it should be scoring touchdowns. It does not score points at the rate it should be scoring points, and it has not sustained enough fantasy player relevant week to week to week. The investment is in CeeDee Lamb. The investment is in, Zeke.
Cedric Wilson.
Cedric Wilson is the guy I'm buying in this offense. 100%. I think Gallup is out the door. I think Cedric Wilson. I just think Amari Cooper he's going to have games, but Amari Cooper has yet to really produce those top 10 fantasy games on a consistent basis that is going to warrant the 4th round pick that you're going to have to pay for him, that you have to pay for him every year. He does not ever return his ADP. Hasn't returned his ADP in the last 2 years, maybe the last 3 years, maybe even the last 4 years. He's not going to return it again this year. It's just not. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb, Cedric Wilson, Zeke, to a degree. At the tight end, I mean, whether it's Schultz, whether it's Jarwin, whoever again. It's going to be. I mean, it could be whoever, right? But I just don't see. He just doesn't command enough for me. Amari Cooper, good player. It's going to be fine. You'll get him as a wide receiver 3. He'll put up high wide receiver 3 numbers. He'll be a top 30 player, but you're paying the premium for him every year. And I'd rather, you were drafting Amari Cooper over players like Cooper Kupp, over DJ Moore, which, all right, I know DJ Moore didn't necessarily pan out, but I'd rather shoot for the ceiling. If I'm going to go in that round and go for someone, I want someone who's going to return me a potential top 10. Deontay Johnson was a player that you could have got a round and a half later. Tyler Lockett was someone you could have got 2 rounds later than Amari Cooper. That's going to continue to be the case for me. So I have to fade Amari Cooper because it's going to be the same.
Fair enough. My one's probably quite controversial. I've got Kyle Pitts as somebody I think will be drafted too high. I think the expectation on him is still high. Ridley going out, as BJ mentioned earlier, put a huge weight on Pitts' shoulders, and he struggled to carry that for a while. We don't know, I guess, if Ridley's going to come back and play football, and if he does, if it's with the Falcons. And I can't see them making a big enough change on their O-line and giving him enough help with other receivers to kind of help him shoulder that burden a little bit. So I think he's a huge talent. I think he'll, in Dynasty, repay you over the years. I just don't think it's next year for me. So I will skip it and grab one later on. Personally. Sorry, guys, that's probably a bit controversial.
No, I get the logic on it, 100%.
I'm not a big early drafter of tight ends anyway, I have to be honest. So I'll sooner pick 2 or 3 late down and hope to pump one and waiver one each week and see how we go. So I think there's better value elsewhere than tight ends.
Okay. I'll say I've often been like that. And this year I drafted Mark Andrews, and he single-handedly got me to the playoffs. I mean, single-handedly in certain games, he scored points that put me over the top that no human tight end should ever be able to get. So I think you have to get really lucky with a tight end if you draft them. For that, I agree with you. If you draft a tight end and he's the 8th best tight end, was it really worth it? Probably not. So if you draft a tight end, it better be a difference maker, or else what's the point?
Yeah, fair enough. Really quickly, then, there's one name from each of you. Who is the player you want on all your teams, BJ?
For the 3rd straight year, Alexander Madison.
Oh, okay.
Murph?
Same team, different player, Justin Jefferson.
Okay. Mine this year is going to be Deontay Johnson, improvement at QB.
That was mine last year.
Was it? Mine last year.
I took that one.
That didn't go too well. So.
I took that one to the bank last year.
Super. BJ,
I think I carried him everywhere.
The one player you're fading next year, then, BJ, who will you not own any of?
It's probably going to be Saquon Barkley, to be honest. Yeah, that's right. But see, for me, it's a great question. Both these questions, and Alexander Madison was a serious answer, but it was also to the point of we're always looking for value, right, in drafts.
Mm-hmm.
So I might fade someone, but if they keep dropping, they'll reach a point where I say I can't fade them anymore. And so when it comes to someone like Alexander Madison, 8th round, 9th round, I'm taking Alexander Madison. I know that there's going to be 2-3 games in the season when I'm getting an RB1. That's what I'm drafting at that spot. When it comes to fading, I'm going to say Barkley. And if he drops to the end of the 2nd round and I say, all right, roll the dice. Yeah. But the reality is I don't think I want the hassle of having someone at that level that I expect so much from, who comes with such serious risks that for all intents and purposes, Barkley is a fade, but I could backtrack on it if he just falls to a point where I go, the risk of taking him at this point is so minimal because I could get, the 12th best receiver or whatever if it gets down into the 3rd round, or I can take a chance on a running back who, if things break right, is a top 8 running back. It's a no-brainer at that point. But Barkley now would be my fade.
I've earmarked him for a bounce-back year, so grab him. Murf, who are you fading?
Barkley was mine, so I'm going to give you another name. I'm going to give you Stefan Dix. I love Stefan Dix. There's no knock on Stefan Dix. Stefan Dix is going to be a 2nd-round player again this year, like he was a 2nd-round player last year. The problem with Stefan Dix is not actually Stefan Dix. It's just the fact that he doesn't put up enough wide receiver 1 weeks to warrant spending that kind of capital on a player. Yes, he's going to be a lovely, safe floor top 10 play. That's not what you're drafting in the 2nd round. You're drafting guys who are going to win you weeks. You're going to draft the Justin Jeffersons. You're going to draft these players who will have wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 overall finishes. Stefan Diggs last year, 4 wide receiver 1 weeks. He finished a handful of points ahead of of Deontay Johnson, who we've already mentioned, who you could have got 4 rounds later. For me, if you want that safe player, there's those guys that you're going to get 3 rounds, 2 rounds later than Stefan Diggs for the same rough sort of points and leading wins you're going to get. There's no knock on the play. I think he's terrific. I think he's going to get guarded a lot more this year. We saw that last year or 2021. I think he's going to be in a similar situation because you're not going to have an outstanding talent. So Stefan Diggs for me, someone in the 2nd round I can't take. 3rd round, maybe. 4th round, definitely pulling the trigger. I'm like BJ. At end of the 3rd, 4th round, I'm in. Because at that point he becomes a value. But if you're going to go in the 2nd round, I'm out all day long. I can't take him.
Fine. And I've gone for an either or. I've got OBJ or Robert Woods, depending on whether Odell Beckham stays at the Rams. I can't see Cup, OBJ, and Woods being sustainable. And I think OBJ and Robert Woods eat into each other too much to make either of them a viable option at where they'll be drafted. So depending on what they do, either or if they're both on the Rams offense. So BJ, just before we wrap it up, tell us a little bit about where the people listening and watching can get more from you, articles, Twitter, etc. What have you got?
Oh, it's very nice to get BJ Rudell. You can read my stuff on Twitter at BJ Rudell, and also Pro Football Network, where I'm director of fantasy football. And that's at profootballnetwork.com. We have, even in the off season, dozens and dozens and dozens of articles every week that my team and I produce. These days, we've been doing a lot of prop bet recommendations,
Nice.
DraftKings and FanDuel recommendations. I did have, for those of you who do DraftKings, I made the case in one of my articles just to show that we try not to commoditize this stuff. We try to be a little unconventional and challenge assumptions. And in the captain slot for the Cincinnati game, I had Evan McPherson as my captain, where you pay 1.5 times premium on the price, so you have more cap space, but you get 1.5 times the production. We're trying to get people to think differently, as we all are, about fantasy football, and not just going with last week's stats, but really trying to think about what is the great game script going to be, and how will players be impacted by that game script. And so you can read our stuff at profootballnetwork.com.
Fantastic. And as always, you can find us at 5 Yard Rush, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That just about wraps us up for this week. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. The divisional championships out of the way, conference championships to come. Murf, close us out.
BJ, as always, thanks for joining. Have to get you on again in the off season and start looking at 2022 and breaking it down, because I love the way you think. So many of the things I agree with, a couple of things I'm contrarian with, but then that's why we'll get smarter, right? Is getting people that think differently. But I love the way that you do things, and you've been incredibly supportive of me and my work. So bless you. Thank you for coming on. And
thanks,
do
man.
check out Pro Football Network. And
Means
as always, ladies and gents, don't forget, keep rushing.